Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 9/11 Global Interactive broadcast. We have viewers from around the world, from the US and England all the way to Morocco and Japan. So it's really nice to see that the word is getting out. I'll skip my introductory remarks since I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with our broadcast that we did earlier today and yesterday. And I'll happily proceed towards introducing the moderator. The wonderful Bev Collins in British Columbia, Canada. She has served as a federal political candidate in 6 federal elections. She is a writer, author, and talk show host. And her talk show host concerns many important topics such as 9/11, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, and Canadian rights and freedoms. Bev, please take it away.
Thank you, Adnan. It's been wonderful to be a part of this global broadcast, both yesterday and today. And the quality of speakers that we've had for our first broadcast has been exceptional. And I'm really excited to hear that we've had great feedback, and we'd like to continue for next year's anniversary if necessary. So I'm quite excited. I'd like to introduce our first guest. What we'll be doing is each of us will have a 30-minute presentation, followed by approximate 10-minute question and answer from you, Adnan, from all the questions and that you will be having come in from our listening audience around the world. And I'm excited to have both Adnan and Elizabeth in discussion in the next half hour. For a little bit of those of you who don't know how wonderful Elizabeth Woodworth is, she is a retired health science librarian and author of What Can I Do? Citizen Strategy for Nuclear Disarmament, which was carried by the United Nations bookstores. And she's been researching 9/11 evidence and editing books for David Ray Griffin, as well as writing articles on the topic since 2006. Elizabeth is also a co-founder and coordinator of the 9/11 Consensus Panel. So welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Beth. Good to be on.
So take it away, Adnan.
Sure. So this is going to be a dialogue between Elizabeth and I to all the viewers out there, because Elizabeth has done some really important work in a particular initiative. Well, she's actually been involved with countless initiatives. So this one in particular is called the 9/11 Consensus Panel. And so it's really important to discuss this. And perhaps I can start off by asking you, Elizabeth, can you describe, or can you start off with describing why was there a need for the 9/11 Consensus Panel?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. First, I'd just like to ask our viewers if they have any questions about the 9/11 Consensus Panel. I'd be more than happy to answer them. So the other thing is that I need to consult my notes quite a bit, because this is all rather complicated, and I want to keep it straight and not waste too much time rambling. The consensus panel was decided between me and David Ray Griffin. We were looking at things in late 2010, and there were about 12 independent professional groups in the 9/11 Truth Movement. But there was no single interdisciplinary organization to look at the whole picture. And just to give you an idea, there were architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is the strongest organization in the Truth Movement, pilots for 9/11 Truth, scholars, scientists, military officers, journalists, physicists, intelligence officers, and health professionals. So it's almost every professional area has been attracted to this movement. So nor was there an organization with an evidence-based process that would state virtually unassailable facts about the broad pictures, the broad picture, I should say. And the broad, like architects and engineers, does really a great job with the buildings, but the flights, the hijackers, the alleged phone calls from the planes that were relied on so heavily for the official story, the activities of the political and military leaders that morning, that's a really big area, like what each one of those was doing individually. We've created a consensus point for each one, and that's very revealing. The that the massive military air exercises scheduled for that morning, the corrupted official video evidence, we go into how that video evidence was made, and we analyze it using our filmmaker, Massimo Mazzucco. So we have evidence that destroys the official story right across the board. And but at that point in 2010, David and I invited 20 experts from these specialty groups to form the consensus panel, and they all said yes.
That's really nice to hear that, there was a recognition, there was a, that you and David recognized that there was a need to bring all these interdisciplinary experts together. And that kind of, in part, answers maybe my next question, but maybe let me ask it another way to have some more details come out. Would you be able to describe, Elizabeth, the cumulative expertise of the 9/11 consensus panel by providing perhaps examples of who some of the experts are and what their backgrounds might be?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, we have two physicists, Stephen Jones, which everybody knows. David Chandler is a physics, I don't think he's a full-fledged physicist, but he teaches physics. And David Chandler has produced a lot of demonstrations on YouTube. That actually, one of them on Building 7 forced NIST to admit to free fall in World Trade Center 7. That was a really significant thing. They had to change their final report because of his work. We have a number of professors, of course, David Ray Griffin, Graham McQueen, who you know was on yesterday, Niels Harrit, a chemist from Denmark, Matthew Witt in California, and historian Daniel Ganser from Switzerland. We have two engineers, John Cole and Tony Zambodi, and we also have NASA engineer Dwayne Dietz. We have Massimo Mazzucco, the filmmaker who did the wonderful film The New Pearl Harbor in 2013. We have two pilots, including David Gapp, G-A-P-P. He's a former U.S. Air Force accident investigator, not long retired, and so he really knows his stuff about planes. And Ralph Kolstad, who flew, I think, for American Airlines for his career. And then journalists, Giotto Chiesa in Italy. He's also a former member of the European Parliament. And Roland Morgan, who has lived in England most of his life and had a column in the Guardian. And we have attorneys William Veal and Dennis McMahon. Bill Veal helped us with the original concept of the panel by thinking that we needed something that was basically unassailable legally. And then we have a physician, Dr. Jonathan Weisbush, and a psychologist that we all know for her fine work, Frances Schur. So that's our group. Most of them. We have a few others too, but I won't go into everybody.
That's a fascinating blend of people. You have social scientists, you have physical scientists, you have engineers, you also have former politicians as well. So it's really a really well-rounded, high-level group, and so a really credible one. And it occurred to me, I remember seeing the website some time ago that there were maybe some patrons as well. Was Michael Meacher? Is he a current UK parliamentarian right now?
He's the longest-sitting parliamentarian in England, and he joined us, the consensus panel, as an honorary member. We have 6 honorary members. I was going to get to those later on, where I've got them all listed here.
Sure, no problem. So yeah, we can definitely revisit that. And I think when you have this wonderful blend of people bringing all this collective expertise together, I guess everything comes down to a methodology. And I was wondering, what is the methodology, Elizabeth, that the 9/11 consensus panel uses for selecting best evidence? And why is this methodology important?
Oh, that's a good question, Adnan. This is where my own personal background comes in as a medical librarian. And when we set up the panel, I discussed it with a former epidemiologist from British Columbia that I worked with for many years as head librarian for the BC Ministry of Health. And he recommended that we use the Delphi method, which the panelists, it's a medical model, and it's the model used in probably one of the biggest models, or most frequently used models that they use in medicine to establish consensus statements. In other words, the best evidence that we have in medicine at this moment. So a group of people are assembled together, and they're not allowed to talk to each other. They review an original statement, which is sent out to all of them. They all review it, and they don't talk to each other, and they return that to the central point, which in our case is myself and David Griffin. And then we incorporate that feedback, and we send it out the second time, and we do that 3 times, 3 rounds of evaluation and feedback. And when that's all finished, you have what is considered by this model to be the best evidence. So the resulting consensus points, that we call these consensus points, medicine calls them consensus statements. This requires 85% approval by the panel to pass the process and be published on our website. Within these points, part of the reviewing is the extensive, David Griffin's books. Like he and I usually start at point, and we take all the documentation that we can find to support it. So usually some of the points have like 40 references in them. So this comprehensive list of documented references, it takes the form of witness testimonies, oral histories, say, of firefighters, early newspaper reports that have disappeared from the web, and in some cases even from the Library of Congress archive. Very telling how thorough the deep state is in scrubbing information from the internet. But we have most of these early newspaper and TV reports, and of course scholarly books and articles. So we offer this refined evidence to the media and the public by the panel as the best evidence the panel can recommend in each particular consensus point. We now have 46 of those.
It's quite an achievement to go through so much evidence. As you're mentioning, there's like sometimes over 40 references for certain things that you're mentioning, and to achieve a consensus is extraordinary. So it's really neat that you bring that background yourself, Elizabeth. A lot of times I think people see you as an organizer of so many initiatives, but in addition to that organization, there's actually amazing expertise that you're bringing into the initiatives as well. So thank you so much for doing that. And just a comment on the side, I think you're so right when it comes to the deep state and how it's covering up its tracks and taking off important articles from the internet. I remember, I believe it was NBC's coverage of that the most crucial chapters of the 9/11 Commission report were based on torture testimony. Especially when it comes to, let's say, the actual 9/11 plot. And that article has now been taken down, but luckily 9/11 activists were able to make a copy of it before it was taken down and reposted it. So I think it's really important to do that, and your initiative is also partly, making sure all that evidence isn't taken down. Now, with these incredible experts that you have in this methodology that you're using, perhaps I can ask, what have been the major successes of the 9/11 consensus panel?
Well, today it's kind of a happy day for me because I looked on our website statistics and noticed that yesterday we had 10,000 visits to the website, which is quite a lot, more than usual. So it's an indication that it's not a lot in terms of the world or even one city, but this ripple that's going out is definite evidence that it is going out, because that's quite a bit more than last year. Our success, I think, is that we have produced 46 points of evidence. That's the first, like the bedrock success that we have. And the evidence is divided into Twin Towers, the collapse of World Trade Center 7, the Pentagon, although we don't ever discuss what did or didn't hit it, because you could never get consensus on that one. But we do have other points on the Pentagon that, like the foreknowledge point, which is one that we published this time. The 9/11 flights, a big one is the U.S. military exercises on and before 9/11. And I mentioned the political and military commands, another big one, the phone calls, and the official video exhibits. It's attracted, this is where I wanted to bring in the honorary members, because the panel has attracted quite prestigious people. One of them is James Douglas, author of JFK and the Unspeakable. Oliver Stone said that he made that movie JFK, and he said that Jim Douglas's book on JFK was the very best one in existence. And so, and he knows about 9/11, and he's one of our honorary members. And Ferdinando Impazamato, the honorary president of the Italian Supreme Court. Matthew Kasowitz, the French director, screenwriter, producer, and actor, one of the best known in France. The late American biologist Lynn Margulis, who was married to Carl Sagan at one time. We mentioned Michael Meacher in the UK Parliament. Attorney William Pepper, who's quite well known for his court case on Martin Luther King. I think he was hired by the King family to do a sort of a court case, a court trial, not a real one, but whatever you call that. And Andreas von Bülow, former German Minister for Research and Technology. So we have those people, and we have 3,500 followers on Twitter. We had a total of 318,000 visitors to our website in 2014, and we're trying to get onto the Wikipedia, which has been steadfastly locking us out, even though our members are all on there. The Wikipedia is saying that the consensus panel itself isn't famous enough to be included. So, so that's how those are our successes, Adnan.
Thank you for going through all that. It's remarkable that Wikipedia would say that, because you have such extraordinary experts and patrons, and you've also gone very mainstream with some very major press releases. I think you lead the move. I think it's fair to say that you lead the movement in probably the most attractive press releases, and they're also very substantial in their content, and that they've attracted the most attention. So, and despite that, Wikipedia still does that. It's quite extraordinary. Moving on now, I wanted to touch upon a topic that seems quite complex, and even the first time I approached it, I found it to be quite complicated, and that's the topic of able danger. And so my question is, with regards to the panel's most recent press release, can you tell us more about the able danger finding, Elizabeth?
Yes, thanks, Adnan. Able danger, this is the first thing that's important to realize. It was the code name for a high-level intelligence operation, and it was co-founded by top people in the defense establishment, General Hugh Shelton and Peter Schumacher, or Maker, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. And they thought that if they started in 1999 with this, and they used this brilliant data mining technique, which just processes terabytes of the internet data in areas related to terrorism, and I think they were really out to find terrorists. And then they download all this data, and they run software to find patterns of communication with people that would identify suspected terrorists. So without knowing what they did, what they were onto, they found that and they even had this man on a chart for 2 years. That they had found Mohammed Atta had been in the United States as early as January, February 2000, about 18 months before the attacks. Whereas the official story, which didn't mention Abel Danger at all, said that he had not arrived until June of that year, 4 months later. The officials also claimed that U.S. intelligence didn't know Atta was in the country before 9/11, whereas this vital arm of U.S. intelligence knew he had been there for 18 months. Now, the Abel Danger team tried to tell the FBI that they were finding this evidence about terrorists living in New York City, and they couldn't get. I don't know whether it was just bureaucracy or whether the FBI wanted to shut this information out, and so that they could later on say that they didn't know. But they couldn't get a meeting with them, and then the operation was shut down, and all the terabytes of information were destroyed. So it wasn't included in the 9/11 mission report. After the fact, after the commission report came out, the Defense Department's Inspector General. Meanwhile, this is all on the website, and I don't want to take too much time with it here. Hold on, I'm just going to look over here to where I have a little bit more information.
Sure, no problem.
I want to get the facts straight here. After the attacks happened, and everybody recognized Mohammed Atta's face, then Abel Danger people turned into whistleblowers, and they told Kurt Weldon, and these people were all trying to get to the bottom of this. You know, why wasn't this known? I mean, how could these two top generals have appointed this team? It was scrambling to try and tell them something, and then they shut it down. Like, the fact is, they shut it down before the attacks. So it's all very, very, very fishy. And I think if our consensus point, can get out there enough, because it's clear enough the way the point's laid out, that a lot of people could understand this and maybe try to get some action on it.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, and it's a lot simpler now once you've explained it like that, Elizabeth. And it's quite extraordinary when you hear about the amount of information that was destroyed, the volumes of information collection that was destroyed. When you talk about that many terabytes, I remember hearing one analogy in the past that it was equivalent to maybe a quarter of all the collections in the U.S. Library of Congress or so. And so it's really amazing that would happen.
Adnan, excuse me just one moment. I'd just like to mention my last point here.
Sure.
That Louis Freeh, the former director of the FBI, called the 9/11 Commission's claim that the evidence was not historically significant, which is why they left it out. He called that claim astounding. And I also wanted to mention to our viewers that on the website, which is consensus911.org, this is consensus point H2.
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. And this brings me to my question about, with all these findings, with this incredible panel that you've assembled with David Ray Griffin, have there been any instances, Elizabeth, where independent experts have reviewed or interacted with the panel's findings? And if so, well, what were their reactions?
We've had a couple of articles written about us, which will be, we hope, on the Wikipedia site. We're still working on that. I don't have them. Brian Birchall, an engineer here in Victoria that I know, has written an article. I don't have the name of it right in front of me. We've had a lot of positive feedback to our online email address. Recently, I thought it was kind of nice. This man said that he'd made bumper stickers for the 9/11 consensus panel and was handing those out. The best thing that's happened to us through our website is that 5 volunteer translators from around the world have volunteered their services, and these 46 points, if you take them all together, it would make a whole book, like a big book of information. And these wonderful people, they are the most committed people, and they're absolutely really interested in achieving high quality attention to detail. And so we have the points available in French, German, Dutch, Italian, and Spanish. So when you go to the website, up in the left-hand corner, you'll see this list of you can click on any point wherever you are navigating in the website. You can click on the French version or the Spanish version, whatever you want to do. So then when we release the press releases, they go to these translators, who then translate and put them on the homepage of their language part of the website, and then they issue the press release to the media in their country. And and Giero Chiesa always carries them. In Italy, he gets 15% of the Italian population watching his blog. And we've got our Dutch translator sent out the press release September 10th, and a major TV station picked it up. So that's kind of a summary there.
And I did notice the different languages that were available, and so it's really nice to see that the panel has this international and global scope that can be hopefully related to as many people as possible. And I was wondering, when it comes to thinking about the future, Elizabeth, what type of impact would you like to see the panel make in the coming years, especially given the 15th anniversary of 9/11 is coming around just next year?
That's a really good question, Adnan. I think the evidence from the consensus panel and from the Toronto hearings would provide a really great start for a court case or a grand jury investigation, which I think must sooner or later come, because this bed of lies is so transparent. People just kind of joke about 9/11. Everybody knows. The media goes on as if it's all true. But for my own self, as Graham McQueen pointed out yesterday, our relationship to the natural world must change soon to avoid devastation. And this is the main reason that both David Griffin and I have been working on the consensus on 9/11 for the last 8 or 9 years for me, and I think it's 10 for him or more, because climate change is on the back burner and ISIS is on the front burner. And it's all about oil, whichever end you look at it from. Trying to get control of the Middle East is about oil. Burning oil is what's ruining the planet. And so I think people are starting to realize that the enemy is inside the gates, and that the truth about 9/11 and the horror of what America has done, both to its own people and to the Middle East, people realizing this could lead to a leap in the evolution of our values and behavior. It'll take some really, 9/11 triggered this horrible 15, 14 years of history, but it could also trigger a backlash to that. So I think it could lead to a more inclusive world and a period of greater global equity and justice.
That was wonderful, Elizabeth. And I think we, as members of the 9/11 Global Truth Movement, we very much share concerns, and it's something that I think Professor Anthony Hall was saying yesterday, that we're actually trying to defend the rule of law. We're trying to actually care for the natural world and the environment and so forth. And there are all these laws that are coming and suddenly changing civil rights and the definition of them and so forth. So we're seeing ourselves as patriots trying to preserve things. And so it's really nice that you touched upon that. I believe that brings us to the end of a dialogue between you and I specifically. I've hogged you for so long. Thank you for. And perhaps, Bev, if it's okay with you, if I can read one question that had come in for Elizabeth here, and then we can expand the dialogue among us, including David and yourself too. So a question came in. Whoa, quite a few questions came in for Elizabeth. Okay, so here we have, I am a big admirer of Elizabeth Woodworth. 9/11 truthers tend to be men between ages 25 to 65. As a woman, I find my circle of ladies thoroughly unable to comprehend that our government and media would lie to us. How do you introduce the topic to your friends who are not truthers?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one good way of doing it is mentioning famous people, respected people who are working on this. You know, there are quite a few actors. I didn't mention actors and artists for 9/11 Truth, but there are, gosh, if you go to that site, there are dozens of really well-known actors who have made statements, and they can get away with it because they don't really depend on you know, the BC government or some corporation to pay them. So, and then all the people that I just mentioned that are honorary members, like the honorary president of the Italian Supreme Court. I mean, there's a man that's been looking at weighing judgments all his life. If he thinks 9/11 is an inside job, maybe you should listen. You know, that kind of thing. That's the first thing I say.
Okay. And a second question has come in from Donald in St. Louis, USA. I remember a very brief and very early newspaper article which reported the fact that the DNA of other people had been found in the lungs of people who had breathed the 9/11 dust. I have been on the lookout for it for a long time. I don't suppose the consensus panel would have it, would it?
No, we don't have that. That's a fascinating question. And if we could contact that person after the show, I could give them my email address, and as a librarian, I could see if I could find out more about that.
Sure. And a third question has come in from Greg Roberts, USA. Has the consensus panel attempted to show that their experts meet the Daubert standard, Daubert spelled D-A-U-B-E-R-T, Daubert standard for expert testimony in court?
I really can't answer that question. I just don't know. Did you ask if the consensus panel had done that? No, we haven't.
Okay. Sure, no problem. Thanks, Greg, for asking that question. And yeah, that seems like all the questions that have come in. Wow, that was quite a few questions, Elizabeth. Okay, for you. You're a popular lady. Okay. Perhaps we can expand the discussion for a couple of minutes and include Professor Johnson and Bev in here as well. Perhaps I can ask Bev and David if they have any thoughts to share about the 9/11 consensus panel.
Certainly. David, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'd just make a comment. I think it's a great idea and a way of diversifying the critical mass that we need to get people to understand that this is for broad spread support for the reinvestigation of 9/11. And so I commend you for undertaking this. And we have to thank David Ray Griffin again for all that he's done. And you too, Elizabeth.
Thank you, David.
Okay, well, for me, I really appreciated two former points that the consensus panel had really researched, and one of them was the number of military exercise drills that were occurring on 9/11, If you wanted to touch upon that point at all, Elizabeth, if you're comfortable, only because you had done such a great job in regards to identifying that there was more than one drill happening, and there was a lot of really good information that had been put in that point. And the other point I really liked was you had identified, or Consensus Panel had identified, where different people were that day. The ones that were in positions of power, like the head of NORAD, and different personnel that really weren't where they should have been. There was questions as to what role, if any, they actually may have played that day. But I remember the drill being one of the important ones that really stuck with me in regards to the evidence that you had put together in the consensus panel.
Yes, Bev, you've just touched on my personally favorite subject that we've dealt with.
I didn't know that.
I researched that, the military drills, and I wrote an article back in 2007. I really worked hard on it for a couple of months. And so then so it was basically my point. Now, it's really interesting because the U.S. Military has these major, huge Air Force drills about 4 times a year. And they're in April, and they tend to be in October. Now, we have evidence that they switched them. They actually announced in one of their newsletters to their staff, they moved them to the morning of September the 11th. And this includes, I've got it open now, Vigilant Guardian. It's an annual NORAD exercise held in October. Global Guardian, a massive annual command post exercise. Crown Vigilance, there were a dozen of them. And these were all running on the morning of the... So when these hijacked planes were reported lost and, off track and all that, all this stuff was in the computer systems of the FAA and everybody out there. And that was, I think this was the cover story. And the big question is, who scheduled these drills all in the same morning? It's uncanny. It's just never happened before, and it will never happen again. So that point is called point ME2. And you can find all the points on the consensus panel. They're all listed in one index near the front.
If I can just jump in here, if that's okay. Elizabeth, a comment has come in for you. It's about 3 paragraphs, if I may read it. Elizabeth, thank you for continuing the research and advocacy around 9/11. My frustration has to do on what more can be done to open the dialogue in the United States to force a reinvestigation or at least an acknowledgement of the inadequacies of the 9/11 Commission. When I broached the subject in Canada and the United States with friends and family, I am still met with incredulity and increasingly complacency as the event fades in history. Has the 9/11 community considered partnering with a top-notch advertising or marketing group to try to get more buzz and traction on the topic? Could funds be raised for such an approach and in preparation for the 15th anniversary? I think the WTC7 Collapse campaign last year was a good effort in the right direction. Thank you, and it's from Justine Lalonde. Thank you, Justine, for asking that question. Elizabeth, your thoughts?
Well, that's an excellent question. It really is. Most of the efforts we've made so far have been through our own fundraising efforts. I don't mean just the panel, I mean architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. They've done a great job. But we really do need, if somebody would come along with, I think somebody even took out a full page in the New York Times once, but a sustained capital investment in this is needed, and a top-notch advertising company that could, if the mainstream would run them, I don't know if they'd even run them. Supposing you had $1 billion, would they run the ads that we might come up with? It's a good question, but behind the raising of funds, there needs to be a lot more citizen concern. I think getting it off the apart from the horrendous loss of life in the Middle East, which is so unfair and diabolical. You know, it's the worst tragedy of thousands of years, probably, what's been happening there. Apart from that, if people just knew how unfair we were being, I think they would rise up, you know, by the millions and demand some kind of justice be brought to bear on the situation, some kind of reparations made in the Middle East, and get on with the real important issue, which is addressing climate change and forgetting about oil. We have to move to solar and wind and geothermal, and I mean tidal. It's all out there. All we have to do is realize it. The media has to, and the media is probably the worst offender of all because they're not doing their job.
Two more questions have come in. Are we, Elizabeth, I must say you've received more questions than any of our previous guest speakers. So, Bev, is it okay if we take another minute or two to go through these questions?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important if we can do that.
Okay, perfect. So we have a question from Wayne Costa in USA. What do you think about the 28 pages campaign led by Walter Jones, Stephen Lynch, Thomas Massie, and Senator Bob Graham? Do you think this is a genuine effort to bring accountability to government? Do you think that Bob Graham is at long last attempting to make amends for the harm inflicted on the American people he may have been in part responsible for? And then there's another question that's come in. I can go through that later. So Elizabeth, your thoughts on whether it's a genuine effort, these 28 redacted pages?
Yes, thanks. That's a very good question, Wayne. I don't stand in the majority of the truth movement by saying, yes, I do think it's a very good effort. And I have listened carefully to Thomas Massie and the other two men who have gone down into the bowels of the Congress. They've gone down there where you read these 28 pages in a closed room with guards outside. You can't take in a pen or a pencil or a recording device because they are that secret. And everybody who's done that is horrified. And I wouldn't necessarily take their word for it if I hadn't watched them describe the way they felt when they came out. And usually you can assess people's sincerity when you see them speaking passionately. And, you know, Bob Graham, wasn't he the chair of that committee that oversaw that study or the report? And even the members, the people who headed Keene and Hamilton said we wanted everybody to see everything that we did. I'm not so sure it's the commission itself or the other one that it's not the same as the 9/11 Commission report. It's the bipartisan. I think it's the Congressional Senate report that came out before the 9/11 Commission report that had the 28 pages redacted. So there are now, I think there are about 17 Congress people that are calling for this. But this happened before. It happened back when it was the pages were first known to have been redacted in 2002 or 3. 46 people from the Congress wanted them at that time. That's not remembered right now. So when 46 people are calling for something, it can't be a limited hangout, can it?
Yeah.
Which is what people are saying it is. You know, a lot of us are stuck in our own imaginations thinking about, well, what are they thinking now and why are they doing this? I bet it's a limited hangout. I don't see any evidence of that. When we speak about evidence, we look at who's calling for it. We need to know who funded those attacks. And that's what it's about. That's what the pages are about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And last question here. Dear Elizabeth, could you comment on the burials that should have taken place resulting from the Shanksville and the Pentagon flights? From Michael Diamond, New Jersey, USA.
I've never thought about that. I don't know anything about what they did in New York City. with relation to burials. Maybe somebody else can answer that.
Okay. Okay, Bev. Perhaps we can proceed to. We can thank Elizabeth.
I would like to personally thank Elizabeth for being part of our global broadcast. You're always a delight to have on, and the wealth of knowledge that you hold in that beautiful head of yours, I wish we could tap into. There's a lot there to share, and we're so happy that you're very much an integral part of the 9/11 movement in Canada. And the points that come forward with Consensus Panel are awesome pieces of evidence that we can share with anybody in the world and not have to worry about, oh, they're flakes or conspiracy theorists. These are professionals who have reviewed the evidence and agreed to the points that you have put together. So I think that's wonderful that you're a part of that and a part of our movement in Canada. So thank you, Elizabeth, for being a part of today.
Well, thank you, Bev, very much. I always enjoy being associated with you on any of your shows. And Adnan, for the great amount of work you put into this, I was delighted to be invited to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next and final guest today is a gentleman by the name of David Johnson. He is a professor emeritus of urban and regional planning at the University of Tennessee and a fellow at the American Institute for Certified Planners. Specializing in international development, he was a Fulbright Scholar in Cyprus, Russia, India, and Thailand. As past president of the Fulbright Association, he helped establish the Fulbright Prize, awarded to Nelson Mandela and Jimmy Carter, among others. He received his BA and master's degrees in architecture and planning from Yale University and a PhD in regional planning from Cornell University. So we're very pleased to have Professor David Johnson with us this afternoon. His presentation title will be The Vision of the 15th Anniversary of 9/11. So please help me to give a warm welcome to Professor David Johnson. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for that nice introduction. I'm very flattered to be among this very distinguished group of speakers. It's been a really fantastic 2 days, and I'm here because I was one of the 4 respondents at the Toronto hearings held 4 years ago, which laid out the testimony of over 4 days of expert after expert. And after hearing that testimony, I don't see how anybody could come away believing the official story. You know, it's on 9/11. I have gone back to the videos of the Jersey girls, and particularly I've listened to, and yesterday I did this, Kristen Breitweiss's testimony before the Joint Intelligence Committee on behalf of the victims of the attacks. And 14 years later, it still brings tears to the eye. Now, we haven't had justice. We demand justice. Justice must be done. The crime of murder has no statute of limitations. But we've also done damage across the world. I, for one, am very ashamed of what my country has done. I was once very proud of the country. I've served in the military. My brother is buried in Arlington Cemetery. He fought in World War II. We're very patriotic Americans. And we stand for what those values are that we had and we have lost. And that's the price we've had to pay for 9/11 and this terrible conspiracy. Yes, it was a conspiracy. We have a challenge here. I think since the 10th anniversary, we've made some progress in getting the facts. And people like Paul Thompson and Kevin Ryan, who's been on, and Graham McQueen, John Gold, David Chandler, and others have really opened up avenues of information and understanding that we did not have. And I find now, and this is reassuring to me a little bit, that when I talk to people and my colleagues about 9/11, they don't roll their eyes anymore. In fact, some of them say, thank you for doing this, So I think we are making progress, and we have to keep going. It's still very difficult for people to believe that rogue elements of the government might have orchestrated or facilitated the attacks. It's very difficult to accept. We all find it difficult. We trust our government, and we say maybe we can't. In this case, we have to we have to be willing to challenge. It's more patriotic to challenge than it is to be passive in this situation. You know, one question I'd like to put out there for people who are watching right now: think about what we should be doing on the 15th anniversary. That is next year, September 11, 2016. What should we be working towards over the next 12 months? And also think about the longer term. What should we be doing over the next 10 years to make sure that the information is getting out, that the criminals, and they are criminals, are found, and the information is brought to a grand jury, and a successful adjudication of these terrible crimes that have been committed. That won't happen until we have a new investigation, and it won't happen until classified documents are released, and it won't happen until additional knowledgeable whistleblowers speak out. It may take this next 10 years. I think we need to do it within 10 years. We need to be persistent, dogged, and patient. You know, there have been many false flags through history. We can read about them, and some of them are reported accurately, some of them are not. I go back all the way to ancient Rome, where the Emperor Nero started a fire to burn half the city down, 3/4 of the city, AD 64. And Nero wanted to build it was an urban renewal project, just like the World Trade Center. Nero got blamed for it, but he said, I was off in a town 25 miles south of Rome. You can't accuse me of burning Rome. And but they blamed him, and what did he do? He brought in a group called Christians, new sect in Rome, and he tortured them until they confessed, and then he executed them. Nero has not come down as a very successful emperor, of course, a very evil man. But we shouldn't rely on the dustbin of history to solve this and resolve it. The verdict of history is important, but we need to get to the facts, and we need to get to a court of law. Now, why is it that we have this situation, and who did it? What were the motivations? Motivations have come from a variety of sources. They come from a desire to resolve an urban renewal problem in New York. Those buildings were filled with asbestos. They needed to come down. Well, that was only part of it. Others see it in the realm of building empire, just like the Roman Empire. Well, you know, empires, modern or ancient, share certain characteristics. They are based on military power. They weaken and reject civilian control. They render representative bodies powerless and paralyzed. The rule of law is curtailed. The empires need constantly to expand to nourish their thirst for resources. They are inherently unstable, and they have difficulties managing centralized power succession. They tend to centralize power in family dynasties. They make a sharp distinction between members of their society and outsiders, but at the same time, they see the mass of people within their boundaries as resources to exploit. They tend to neglect civil infrastructure, but in the long run, empires are unsustainable, and they eventually collapse. Is that our future? Is that where we are headed? Perhaps, unless we can change our ways. The key questions that still remain to be answered are these: who planned the attacks? Who provided the money support to carry them out? who actually carried out the attacks and with what logistics, and who benefited from the attacks. Now, historians like Daniel Ganser, who talked to us yesterday, are making good progress helping to answer some of these questions. And Kevin Ryan's careful, comprehensive research has begun to steer us in productive direction, too. But more progress needs to be made. As we look ahead to the 15th anniversary of the events, what should we do? How should we proceed to show the facts that have been carefully gathered and systematically ignored? Well, we should continue to demand a new independent investigation within the United States focused on the crimes committed on 9/11. This could take several forms at the federal level, congressional level again, a blue ribbon panel convened by the White House, criminal investigations are originating in the Office of the Attorney General. There can be legal actions at the state and local level. We tried that in New York. It didn't quite work, but it's worth trying again. We should continue to demand that the 28 redacted pages be made public. But don't expect these to answer the central questions about 9/11. We need to go further than that. And we should promote the U.S. ratification of the International Criminal Court and subsequent investigation of possible violations of international law by individuals and corporations. Well, you know, we've broken many international laws, and we've committed violations of the Geneva Conventions, torture, willingly causing great suffering, unlawful deportation and transfer, taking hostages, unlawful confinement. We've invaded and attacked countries preemptively. That is a violation of the UN Charter. We've annexed territory and we've used weapons against territory. I could go on and on. I hope everyone in this country who hears this and around the world understands that we know that this is wrong, and we're going to try to get an audience to address these criminal actions and the people who have committed them in our name. Another thing that is we could consider is convening a blue ribbon panel of distinguished independent jurists and legal scholars from the 24 countries whose citizens died on 9/11 at the World Trade Center. It wasn't just Americans. 24 countries lost citizens, and they should take an interest in justice for their people too. Surely there are jurists out there in these countries who will come forward and serve on a panel to review the evidence and issue a equivalent of a grand jury indictment. We should pursue that and work towards that. These are just some of the ideas. There are other ideas. We might use the new technology that we're employing here today. Perhaps we can manage to conduct simultaneous demonstrations in cities around the world on September 11th, 2016, demanding a new investigation. Perhaps we can produce a global web broadcast on that day, linking 9/11 movements across the planet, something we might call a web-in. We could issue a fervent appeal to whistleblowers, as David Chandler has, to those with critical information. Come forward now. Don't wait for deathbed confessions. Get it out of your system and your soul. Well, those are some ideas, and I think we probably have other ideas out there. I would invite the audience here to put them down in paper and type them on your computer and get them to Adnan, and we'll see if we have some new ideas. Meanwhile, let's have a little discussion here about what we can do. Have I covered all the bases? Does anybody on the panel, Elizabeth or Bev or Adnan, do you have other ideas for how we should use the next 12 months?
Elizabeth, do you want to begin?
Oh, it's so hard because I think about this all the time. Oh. One thing that I find really is works for the panel. Like I said, there were 10,000 people that looked at the website yesterday, and we all have our websites. But when you use Twitter, if you're an organization like the panel, and I never say anything that wouldn't be spoken by all 24 of us. I have to be very careful what I tweet. But it's all right to go to individuals around the world to tweet them individually. You can do that. You can watch the tweets coming through by searching them, just like you do on Google. You can search Twitter, and you can search it on Building 7 or 9/11 lies or whatever you want to. Then you can see who's commenting on this, who's sending tweets. Some of the people who are sending tweets have got 200,000 followers. Some have, there was one entity that followed me that had 2 million. And so then you think, okay, if I tweet to that person individually with this, say, the Able Danger point, new evidence about, foreknowledge about 9/11 from the senior levels of government, that person retweets it to their following. Say it's only 80,000. Like we have 3,500. That's not bad but a lot of them have and some of these rock stars, like they have a lot of. So they retweet it, and the chances are then that out of the 80,000, about 10% might actually be there in front of their computer. So maybe 8,000 see it, and maybe only another 1% tweet it. But it's still a powerful tool. And it's allowed the consensus panel. Before we started using Twitter, which was 2 years ago, we were only getting 200 views daily on our website, and now we're getting between 800 and 1,000 every day, no matter what we do. It's opened up the consensus panel as a sort of an awareness in enough minds that 800 people go to the site every day, new people. So, and yesterday it was 10,000 because I tweeted all day. And I tweeted using that type of, so I don't know how many new people I tweeted to. Everybody was tweeting yesterday. Everybody and their uncle was tweeting because it was 9/11. So then you've got all these people that know. So you can tweet each one of them. And they're happy to be tweeted to on 9/11 because it's like a big party. It's the 9/11 party of the year where everybody who knows about it wants to kind of embrace each other and do something. So, but we don't have to do that just on 9/11. Like we could say we declared quarterly 9/11 tweet days or something, like once a quarter. And they call those tweet storms and tweet raves and things like that, where you send out the word that you're going to have a tweet storm today, and everybody thinks, oh, this is fun. I wasn't going to do much today anyway, so I'll get involved in that. So that's one idea.
Good. Anybody else have ideas?
Yeah, that was a great idea. I've thought long and hard about this as well. I had some wise words given to me this week in regards to it is not really the global war on terror. It is actually 9/11 wars. And I think it's really important to start helping to build the language in regards to what has gone on and what is going on by connecting it back to something that people will understand and affect them right now. For example, by saying, what we're facing now are 9/11 wars. It all stems back to the events of 9/11 and the Iraq-Afghanistan wars, and now, further extending into it because of the supposed terrorists, that when you go back to it, that was a lie as well. Afghanistan and Iraq had nothing to do with the events and attacks of 9/11, yet they were the first two wars that the U.S. launched. What gives me hope, possibly this next year, is changes in leadership in countries. The fact that the UK just voted a different leader in, and someone who is willing to look at potentially bringing war crime charges against Tony Blair might start to open it up for people to realize, wow, if they can go after Tony Blair, George Bush and Dick Cheney should be next. And it might inspire them, people from those countries, to say, hey, wait a minute, it was all based on lies. And really then open up our next anniversary of 9/11 to be able to actually see criminal charges being laid against some of the true perpetrators of the events of 9/11. What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Well, I hope it happens. I don't know how we prod it and move it down the trail. What we have to do is make sure that people see all of the very fine, persuasive, fact-based analyses that we now have. Elizabeth referred to the 5-hour New Pearl Harbor by Massimo Mazzucco. If you haven't seen this, it's a marvelous piece of cinema, and he debunks all the debunkers, but that hasn't been seen it's been seen only by thousands of people. It needs to be seen by millions of people. The 5-minute summary by James Corbett is a brilliant piece of videography. 5 minutes, he gets the whole thing in. You don't have to spend 5 hours. And that's been seen by 2 million people. That's the kind of thing we need to get out there. There are other things. The David Chandler experiments, the little video experiments he shows, very persuasive. He's a marvelous explainer of why the physics is wrong, and the NIST people have violated their engineering ethics by lying. There are other things out there now. The architects and engineers have produced a new 52-page review of the engineering analyses of NIST and showing how they're flawed and misinformed. It's called Beyond Misinformation, and it's worth looking at. It's rather technical. I think maybe it's too technical. We need to keep it simple. The message needs to be simple and persuasive. And that's not easy when you're dealing with complex phenomena like this, but we need to make it happen. I think we find now that we are making things happen. The reactions to what we're doing are becoming more bellicose. Have you noticed that the Harvard law professor calls for a public intellectual has called for conspiracy theorists to be groups to be penetrated, and this I guess disemboweled. I don't know what he has in mind. You'd think Harvard professors would know, especially law professors, that maybe this was a kind of academic McCarthyism. We don't need that. But there are other groups out there doing things. There's a philosophy professor at Warwick University in the UK. He's just been awarded a government grant of £300,000, which is, I guess, $250,000. No, it's more than that. $450 million, $50,000, to research why people like us, doubters, have mental defects. You know, this is something that totalitarian countries love to do. If you don't believe the orthodoxy, you're obviously mentally ill. And he's gotten this grant to do this. Now, you know, then there's the West Point law professor who he actually is a law professor. He calls for physical attacks on people who are 9/11 doubters. Physical attacks. Here's a man teaching future military leaders something illegal, and it's at West Point. I did my military duty at West Point. It wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. What's happening with our military? Well, there are a lot of good people still in the military, and we need to appeal to them and their sense of fairness and patriotism too. Here's David Cameron, the Prime Minister of England. You know what he says? He said at the UN, if you doubt 9/11, you are a terrorist. Well, I would say to Mr. Cameron, in the words of another tainted politician, how dare you? How dare you? Which is what Bill Clinton once said when someone said, what do you think of happened on 9/11? How dare you, Clinton said. Well, how dare you, Mr. Clinton? How dare you, Mr. Cameron? We've got the evidence. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit passionate here, but I think we have to be passionate about this. So we have our work cut out. Our republic is in danger. It really is in danger, and that's why we need to work on this and continue to work on it. And we will be working on it over the coming year. And if you have ideas, send them in. We need your ideas.
Yeah, and David, I think that was marvelously put in your presentation overall. One of the reasons why I invited Professor Johnson was because of the intellectual caliber he demonstrated as the panelist in assessing or in evaluating all the evidence presented on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 at the Toronto hearings in Ryerson University, and I was so happy to see his presentation again. It resonated with me with the same inspirational notes, and it really provides us the type of wisdom and the vector that our movement needs. You mentioned one thing that occurred to my mind, which was about coordinated protests, perhaps connected by live broadcast from different countries. I know I can go down to the city of Toronto, and in a protest I could have my phone with me, and I can actually run this entire broadcast that we're doing right now entirely through my iPhone right now as well. And I can see maybe the 9/11 protests in France and Argentina and in other countries. And we're not only 100 people. Sometimes protests are small. We all have experience with those type of things. But once you consider all those countries around having a protest at the same time, we become very strong and very connected. The digital protest becomes very, very real. And so it's amazing how, even though you and I may be 40 years apart, yet we're coming to the same type of solutions or so. So it's fascinating. And on this point of multimedia power, a question did come in for you. Thanks to everyone who put this broadcast together and all of the presenters. Since the release of the Decade of Deception last Thursday, and by the way, I became recently aware of this, Bev and I became aware of this, the Toronto hearings footage, which is several hours long, David, the original video editors of that, the people who had recorded it, managed to somehow summarize the most persuasive parts of it conveniently into 2 hours, or even less. And they called it Decade of Deception. And I saw it, and it went over 150,000 views in just a couple hours. And this person says, Mr. Belshaw in the USA says, I think this shows that the movement has some momentum. I hope that Rethink September 11th, this campaign that we're running, will consider our broadcast once a month to help give us a focal point. And then a second question or comment has come in for you, David. How do we build a collaborative front that can actually bring pressure on governments to embrace accountability and transparency? Also, how do we fold current events into the question of 9/11 so that the issue remains relevant in 2015 and going into the U.S. 2016 presidential elections? From Timothy Michel of 9/11 Truth Outreach.
Good question. Has anybody asked the leading candidates for the two parties what they think about 9/11? Nobody's done that yet. It's my knowledge. We should do that. I think we know what they'll say, but they ought to be put on the spot. You know, movements like this require long-term perspective. We had a terrible curse in this country called slavery. A small group of people in the middle of the 19th century and in the early 19th century called abolitionists got together, and no one thought they would be able to do what they did. And they got slavery abolished. And it required a lot of blood. We don't want that, but you have to stick with the fight. You have to have dedicated, committed people. And you've got to have right on your side and truth on your side. I think we have that. I think we have that. And I think we need to keep working as hard as many people in the movement have. There is a chance, and we need to take that chance and go with it. And I think Elizabeth's absolutely right. These are resource wars. You know, slavery was the oil of the 19th century. If you think about it, it was the energy that made these economies go. And we got rid of it. Well, it's still hanging around as a residual curse, but we got rid of it formally. It was not a part of our legal system anymore. So we can do that. I think we have to persuade people. It's kind of like adapting a new technology, getting people to understand the truth of 9/11. You get the early adopters, it's like a cell phone. There are a few people who went out and bought them when they first came out. Then you get the early adopters, and it goes like a bell curve. And finally, the whole thing becomes everybody has a cell phone. It's that process, and we are the early adopters here. But we have to make sure that everybody finds that it's necessary to get to the bottom of 9/11 for the sake of the world and for the sake of our grandchildren.
David, I'd just like to say something here. Can you
Please.
guys hear me? I'm holding up a book called The Energy of Slaves by Andrew Nikiforuk in Canada. He's in Alberta, and it's fascinating. It's unputdownable about the transition from physical slaves. He called it what do you call it? The muscle power, human muscle power. The transition of that to the use of oil, and how many human slaves we all use the equivalent of to drive our appliances every day. And it's something like 227 slaves we all have in our employ through oil. It's like he measures. It's just a fascinating book. Like I really like to show it to you and show it to our audience because it's worth a read. And ultimately, it's about It talks about the 23 cities now have more than 20 million people in them. And they just suck energy. If you think that each person is using 27 human slaves per day in the equivalent of oil energy, these cities are sucking the planet dry. It's just, and they're not going to be able to sustain. Like, we have to do something about all of this. So that's just kind of a
We have solar and we have wind, we have water power which we can use. There's no reason we cannot get off the oil habit. There really is no reason we can't do it. I have a solar system right outside here I'm looking at. I run my electric car from the sun, and we've got to do that more and more, and that is the future.
Great. I'm glad you're doing that. That goes hand in hand with 9/11. David Griffin has just written a new article trying to link up the 9/11 community to climate. A lot of 9/11 people seem to find that climate denialism comes from the same source as 9/11. Like, they think that whatever thing, if the President of the United States wants to address climate change, they say, well, that's the level that was responsible for 9/11, so they want to deny the evidence about climate change. And he's written a new article about that, and I think it's really important for the 9/11 truth movement to embrace the science on both areas and say it's the same problem, basically.
So for next year, if possible, I would also like to see some of our musicians and some of our artists become part of this. And the reason being is everyone learns differently. Some people learn through video or audio. we have some really awesome professional artists and musicians that have put a lot of thought into the words of their music that tells a whole story just by listening to the songs or reading the poetry. And if we can tap into all of those actors and actresses that are part of the 9/11 movement, as well as the artists and musicians, I think that would be a nice complement to attract the average person to the event, and then we can share some of the harder information with them.
Good
It
idea.
reminds me of the contribution Ed Asner has made to this movement. Lou Grant, you know, the last honest journalist, I guess, but he's a wonderful man, and he's really taken this on. And people like that who are prominent in Hollywood and in Broadway and in entertainment, yes, they can make a great contribution. We should tap them.
Okay, and Nan, are there any other comments or questions for David?
That's everything. It was just those two that came in. As I was mentioning earlier, sometimes questions come in a couple minutes later, just because of a delay in email. But I just wanted to say that it's been a really, especially for Bev and I, because we've both been co-moderating, and it's been such a wonderful experience that I see a lot of potential to this technology. It was our first run. It was an experiment. That's really what the language we were using. We wanted to see if we can do a pure online model. And so it seems pretty good. We never had any hiccups with the technology, luckily. No major hiccups. And I think we were able to put this together in just 2 weeks. And didn't even need to ask mom and dad to borrow their car. So it's really nice. We have a whole year to prepare for the big 15th anniversary. I think we can put our minds together and make a real dent. And of course, that means to peacefully reach out to inquiring minds, and there's many out there. And so I'm very hopeful, and I'm very appreciative of all of you who took part in this, and we all, I think, learned something from each other and learned what we're capable of. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for that. Bev, shall we wrap up everything then?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being one of our special guests today. Your input is always valuable. And thank you to David Johnson for being part of our special guest today as well. Both of your inputs are hugely valuable to the 9/11 Truth Movement. And we look forward to working with you again in the future and getting that information out to as many people as possible.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, everyone.
Thank you, Adnan and Bev, for a great job.
Oh, thank you. And to all of yours out there, please email us, get in touch so we can get this global ball moving. Movement. Okay, take care, everyone. And
Thank you. Good night.